Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Jessica Noviello. Welcome to yet another fantastic iteration of the Professional Advancement Workshop Series, or PAWS. This program is sponsored by the NASA Astrobiology program, and it's designed to help early career scientists explore other career paths and also learn more about potential paths that they can do within NASA and beyond NASA. So it's a fantastic community. I'm really happy that you're all here, and especially for a topic as exciting as today's topic, which is science podcasting. The people who are joining us today are experts in their field and true artists in their craft. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves because I don't think I could do nearly as good a job as they could, but truly they're all wonderful, coming from different backgrounds with different experiences, and I think all have different perspectives on science podcasting. So I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. Just a couple quick notes before we begin. Please remember that there is a code of conduct in effect at all of these PAWS events, and I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat in just a moment. And beyond that, you can feel free to ask questions and interact with us via the chat and the Slido poll. So I will also put the link to that down in just a moment. Any questions about PAWS, feel free to come to me directly. Otherwise, I think we shall launch into the different panelists. And panelists, please take a few minutes, introduce yourselves, and just give us a little bit of background on who you are, where you come from, and how you got into science podcasting, because I personally am very curious to hear what your perspectives are, and I think everybody else is too. So how about Pamela, you were the first to join us. Would you mind starting?
I think I'm also the very first astronomy podcaster, so that works. So I actually got into podcasting back in February of 2006, just a few months after the technology to do XML was with enclosures for RSS feeds was developed. At the time, I was working just after getting my PhD. I was at the Harvard Science Center. I attended a meeting of the American Astronomical Society, and one of my colleagues from the AAVSO grabbed me and he was like, okay, so I read about this new technology that is being used to basically spread Christianity to high-tech people, and I think we should use it to spread science. And that was podcasting. And we launched our first show. It was me, Aaron Price, Travis Pierce. We did it, sorry, Travis Searle. We did it 2 weeks later. We did that show for about 1.5 years, and along the way, we had to work with the folks who were developing podcast directories to get science and technology added as a category. It didn't exist yet. This was back in the days prior to Apple Podcasts. Then 1.5 years later, Aaron went back to grad school. I got a job as a professor and doing a show called Slacker Astronomy that sought to be the daily show of astronomy. Didn't work as well with our professions. So we split and went different directions. Since then, I've been co-hosting the Astronomy Cast podcast with Fraser Cain, the publisher of Universe Today. In 2009, with the International Year of Astronomy, I worked with podcasters all around the world to start a show called 365 Days of Astronomy that is a platform that invites any podcaster the world over working in the English language to share their content, share their passion. And that show continues to go out. We've been the starting place for folks like Paul Matt Sutter with his Planetary Radio. And we're always looking for new shows. And if any of you are inspired to become podcasters because of this panel, I have a place that I can help you get your show out to an existing audience. And we just keep bringing people together. And I podcasted The Daily Show with Andrés, and he'll hopefully talk more about that.
Wow, what a fantastic note to begin on. Thank you so much. I wonder, maybe Andrés, you should be next.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Andrés Plazas Malagón. I'm a scientist at the SLAC National Lab and the Cable Institute for Particle Astrophysics and Cosmology, and I work with an observatory called the Vera Rubin Observatory. I'm also the host of a podcast in Spanish called Visión Cósmica, or Cosmic Vision, an astronomy and cosmology podcast. And my story is actually tied with Pamela's story. As she just said, I'm one of those persons that she actually helped launch a podcast. Our story happened when back in the time I was a postdoc in California, the Jet Propulsion Lab, and then I moved to St. Louis because my wife found a job in St. Louis and I didn't have a job. So I started working with Dr. Gay, with Pamela. One of the things we did was hosting the Daily Show, as you mentioned, and we did a lot of projects on community science or citizen science. One of the things that Pamela told me the very first days is we should launch a podcast in Spanish. So that always resonated there. With me is one of the things we work towards. In the end, I worked with Pamela for about a year or less than that, and then I moved on to work with the Rubin Observatory. During the first year, it didn't happen, and I can tell the reasons. There were challenges, but in 2021, that was always in the back of my mind. So in 2021, I kept talking to Pamela, and they said, "Let's do this," and we did it. So we're relatively new. We have about 27 episodes, and we only dream to reach the 700 or 600 episodes that Astronomy Cast has, but we're there, we're going. There have been a lot of positive comments and at the same time other challenges that I will be more than happy to talk about because I don't do podcasting or science communication during the full time. I do some job with the Rubin Observatory, as I said. So there are some limitations or challenges with that respect. But that's like a very general overview of how I got into the world of podcasting and how Pamela actually helped us with her infrastructure in CosmoQuest to get going and be launched here in the United States. I think we're one of the few podcasts in cosmology and astronomy in Spanish in the United States, I think.
I remember when you and I spoke, Andrés, that we talked about this, but the fact that there are so many Spanish speaking people in the United States, and yet there's so little outreach directed and dedicated to them I'm so glad that you are here to provide this content for them in a language that they can understand so much better than like technical English. Like as a native English speaker, I still struggle with the technical language of science. So just thank you so much for that. It's so cool, so important. Thank you for being here today. Yes, and Melissa has made the point in the chat about how there are so many great telescopes in Latin America. Of course, ALMA in Chile is one of the big ones too. All right, let's move on next to Carrie. You ready?
Sure. So hi, I'm Carrie. I'm an associate professor at Olin College of Engineering, and my specialty is near-Earth asteroids. So I do mostly, your teaching stuff, your research stuff, and then I also have this podcast that I've been doing for a little while, about 6 years, has about 200 episodes. I chose podcasting because I love podcasts. I listen to a ton of podcasts on a ton of different topics. I'm a podcast junkie, and one day it occurred to me that if I want to do science outreach, I should pick a medium that I really love. I also thought that I was really privileged to be able to call somebody up if I have a question about Mars and just chat with them for a little bit. And why not record those conversations so more people can hear them? So that was a little bit of my motivation behind starting SpacePod, which was my podcast. I was going to say something else, but I guess I forgot what it was. So I'll move on to the next person.
Oh, Carrie, you are so fantastic. I'm very glad to see another person in planetary science doing this. But I've noticed your topics don't they're not just planetary science. You have people on from all kinds of scientific backgrounds as well.
Yeah, it's vaguely space related. I think with any podcast, people want to know what they're getting, right? But I kind of define that broadly, like Earth is a planet. So sometimes we have biologists and especially people doing astrobiology. We also have people studying climate change or geologists. So yeah, it's a fun time.
And Linda mentions that you were a TED Fellow just a few years back.
That's true. And I should mention that part of my background from this came from being a AAAS Mass Media Fellow in 2008, so like a while ago. So through that program, I was working with reporters at the Oregonian before newspapers, when newspapers were a little bit stronger. And it was a really incredible team. And that summer really helped me refine my interviewing skills and learn a little bit about journalism. And I really feel like I took a lot from that to create what I'm doing now.
Ooh, we might have a couple of questions about that later on. All right, last but absolutely and certainly not least, we have Ethan Siegel. So Ethan, you have the floor.
You can least it up with me. I don't mind. No, I'm Ethan Siegel. I got my PhD in theoretical cosmology back in 2006, and while I was a postdoc, a couple years later, I actually started working with Pamela L, who was very kind enough to mentor me when I was having a job that I was actually dissatisfied with and was like, oh my God, where do I go from here? And I was like, well, there are other things I enjoy besides doing research. I love teaching. I'd been a professional teacher before at actually all levels, elementary, middle school, high school, and college. In January of 2008, I started blogging. This was way back in the day where you could just get your own domain name and start a blog. And that was a perfectly legitimate thing to do with your time. And it wasn't like, oh God, I have to be part of some network or no one will ever notice me. You could just start writing something and you would show up on Google. And if you wrote something interesting, you could be a hit. After 5 years of doing that, after I had quit my postdoc, moved to Portland, Oregon, became a professor at a college there, moved to a different college in Portland and was a professor there. I said in 2013, okay, one of the things that was out there is I have supporters now. I have people who've been loyal reading my stuff for many years, and maybe there are some new ways I can start reaching out to people. So I decided to start a podcast, and, you can check out Starts with a Bang podcast. We're all over the place now, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts now, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, we're on all the places. But I've just been doing one episode a month for, well, however long it is. At the end of this year, we'll get to episode 100. So I guess that makes I've been doing it for about 8 years now. Originally it was just me. Then I started having guests on and the podcast got a lot longer. And I'll just be candid with everyone, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started asking myself, like, Ethan, what are you doing? Like, why are you having all of these super famous astronomers and astrophysicists who've already made it, who are senior people in the field with big careers, with some with Nobel Prizes? Like, what you should be doing, what you could be doing, is using this platform, using your podcast to bring early career people on, to bring underrepresented people on, to elevate the profile of people who would benefit from that the most. And so I just surreptitiously switched my focus and I said, let's make it a point to bring on women, to bring on people of color, to bring on people who are non-native English speakers, who were born in the United States, who are LGBTQ, who, just maybe are minoritized in a whole variety of ways, and use my platform, that, as much as I have one, to elevate those voices. And I guess for the past several years, I've been doing that with my podcast, and I think it's richer for it. I think this is a niche that really not a lot of people are occupying, to say, let's bring everyone who wants to listen to this, I view people as Martians, my audience as Martians, which is to say people with intelligence, but people with no experience. So the challenge is, let's take where people are comfortable, bring them up to the frontier of a field they're unfamiliar with, but do it in a way that makes it accessible to them. And it's also an extraordinary chance for me to give early career people, people who are grad students, postdocs, early professors in their career. It's pretty easy. I just need to look at someone and I go, oh, you're younger than me, and you're in your early career. So that's it. I bring them on my podcast, and for them, it's a chance to think about bigger questions, broader questions than they deal with in the academic day-to-day of the minutia. So I've heard from a lot of my guests, and Jessica, you've been one, you might want to comment on it, or maybe not, about, this was a good experience because they got to think about aspects of how their science fits into the larger picture of what we know and how we know it, than they normally get to think about. So, one of the things I've sort of discovered about podcasting is, as long as your audio quality is good and you have something of value to say, the rest is up to you. The rest is up to you, and what you do with it, you have total free reign if it's your show.
That's true. I have been a guest on your podcast, Ethan, and I remember that I got into my own head as I was talking to you, and at the very end, I finally broke out of it and said, you know what, I'm just going to say what I think. I've been couching my language this whole time, but no, I'm just gonna start speaking, and it was a lot more fun after that. So definitely learned a lot from doing your podcast. But I've also been a guest on Carrie's podcast as well, so I should be full disclaimer that thank you both for having me on, because they were both a very fun experience. So I want to actually share my screen for just a moment. I hope this is the right one. Here it is. All right, so I asked the participants to put some words into a word cloud to see, what does science podcasting mean to you? We have some really big words in the middle there: sharing, inspiring, informative, reaching lots of people, amplification, storytelling, translating, speaking to new people, outreach, fascinating. Oh, that's great. I see tiring up there too, and can be a lot of work to do podcasting, to do really anything. And I have questions for you, but it looks like we also have a lot of questions coming into the chat here. We have 5, fantastic. And it looks like oh, by the way, panelists, if you see a question that you want to answer and it doesn't look like I'm going to get to it, please feel free to interrupt me to say, hey, Jessica, I actually really want to speak to this point. But I think perhaps we should start with the question on, can you tell us what training you have had to create and lead podcasts?
Well, I don't mind going first because my answer is the easiest, which is to say absolutely none. I've had absolutely no training to do this, and that doesn't stop me. And it shouldn't stop you if you haven't had any training either, because one of the things that I think about a lot when people ask me about my start in science communication of all types is, I don't know how many of you either remember or have learned about the 1980 Miracle on Ice for the U.S. men's hockey team, where the U.S. men's hockey team defeated, in a huge upset, because U.S. team was all amateurs back in the day. The pros were in the NHL and the amateurs were who played in the Olympics. They upset the Soviet Union, and then they upset Canada in the gold medal game, and they won gold, and it was a huge thing, and it was, Miracle on Ice is what it was called. Big phenomenon. About 20 years later, a little more than 20 years later, they were going to make a movie about it. And they said, for this movie, what are we going to do? Are we going to hire actors and get the big name actors so they're a draw for the box office, and teach them how to play hockey so they look like they're playing convincing level hockey? Or are we going to get hockey players and watch them play the very convincing hockey because they've been skating before they can walk, and then teach them how to act? And this to me was a huge question that was about me, because when you are an expert in one thing and not an expert in another thing, people are always going to try to knock you down for the thing you're not an expert in. Ethan, you're an expert in science, sure, no one's doubting that, but you're not an expert in communication, you're not an expert in writing, you're not an expert in podcasting, you're not an expert in all of these things. And that's true. I didn't go to journalism school. I didn't do all of the things. I didn't do any of the things that you would expect someone to do. But what did they do when they made this movie? The answer is they went with the hockey players, because it's easier to teach hockey players how to act than it is to teach actors how to, develop the skills you develop over 20 years of playing, hockey all of the time. And it's the same thing. If you have, like I did, an expertise that almost nobody else has, because, you got your PhD in theoretical cosmology or whatever it is you got your PhD in, and you keep up with the field and you have a good breadth and depth of knowledge and you have things of value to say, the other things, even if you don't have talent, even if you don't have training, you practice. How do you get good at writing? You write. How do you get good at swimming? You swim. How do you get good at playing the piano? You play the piano. And you do it over and over and over again until you're super good at it. You want to get good at communicating science? Start communicating science. Assuming you know science, you have scientific stories to tell, just start doing it, and you will improve. Sometimes I look back at my early writing pieces or listen to my early podcasts so I can cringe at myself, but I can also marvel at how far I've come and how much better I am now because I've put that time and effort in. And I think that if you can just get over that hump of starting it yourself, you'll discover that the time and the energy and the effort you put into it, if you're critical of yourself, if you're, constructively critical, not like, depression critical, if you do it in the right way, you're going to improve, you're going to get better, and you shouldn't be afraid to do it just because you haven't been trained. So I would say, regardless of training, and I'm sure there's a variety of training and education people on the panel have had, the more you do it and the more you care about it, the better you'll get at it.
All right, other panelists.
I hunted down a radio, film, and television major and said, help. We have people that we can learn with that we often call our students. And it turns out that there are lots of students studying journalism who are nerds that are more than happy to pass on their skills. And we have to constantly be improving those skills, and students are constantly needing jobs. So find a student and give them the break they need and learn from them all you can.
I would also add, the technical side of audio recording is learnable. I was a little bit arrogant when I started. I was like, I've used a lot of fancy technical equipment. This will be fine. And it humbled me really quick. But it's pretty learnable. I would also put a shout out. I'm not being paid for this or anything, but there's audio editing software called Descript these days that make my workflow incredibly fast. They have a free trial, and they have an educational discount that I use. There's like a lot of software on there that's free, but if you do want to try this, I would definitely start with that software tool because it's head and shoulders above the rest that I know of. Maybe everybody else has other input there, but Descript is so good, I will shout it out by name.
And finally, I also didn't have any training, like Ethan said, and I just had the motivation from wanting to do science communication, and also the motivation of an expert like Pamela. So also finding help, as has been said, as Pamela said, you can find the people who can help you. You can find that, but even you don't need any training. From my work as a scientist, I used to give talks. Then I used to give also talks about education and public outreach. And then I just started doing it. And then, of course, there are technical challenges, as has been mentioned. And I will always appreciate that I had the infrastructure and the infinite knowledge from a mentor like Pamela. So that actually made things way easier, but things are learnable, as Carrie just said, at the same time. So you don't need to have experience a priori, but of course, that doesn't mean that you cannot get better. So you will get better eventually. Just do it, repetition. You will get better at storytelling. You will find your own style. It's, as you said, is your own podcast, so you start putting your little things in the podcast. I love heavy metal, so I put a little bit of heavy metal at the beginning of my podcast because it's my podcast. So you start personalizing your podcast and getting better at it. And I'm every episode I try to get better at it. I try to get funny about listening my own voice again, but I know I do it because I want to listen to those earlier episodes and see what I can improve. And then you're gonna get better and just throw yourself into the pool and start swimming, so to speak.
I too am a heavy metal fan. So oh, Ethan has a fun anecdote in the chat.
Should I say this out loud to people?
Go for it. Yes.
Yeah, one of the people, as you may know, people on the internet are not shy about sharing their opinions of what they think of content creators or the content they create. And one of the best backhanded compliments I ever got was, I don't like Ethan's style, but at least he has a style. Which, you know, is a sign actually that you are doing something right if you provoke a response like that in someone, because if you can provoke a strong reaction and that reaction is not, this idiot doesn't know what they're talking about, and they can back it up, but the fact that you are an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about, if that's not the critique, anything else that's stylistic is saying, okay, this person is doing something in a way that's different, in a way that other people aren't doing it, in a way that triggered a strong response in me. Some of them are going to like it, some of them are not going to like it. But if you're doing something that you are proud of what you're putting out there and you do trigger that strong reaction in someone, that is a sign that you're actually doing something that is notable, that you're doing something that has grabbed someone's attention, for better or worse. If their personal preferences align with yours or not, that's a subjective thing. But when someone said to me, I don't like Ethan's style, but at least he has a style, like, of course, initially I was like, oh, God, people negging me again. But after a little while, I was like, you know what? That's someone who they're not trying to compliment me, but this really is a compliment coming from someone who will say something like this. And that's important to recognize too, is the ratio of compliments to insults that you'll receive. Those insults are going to weigh on you more. You're going to feel like those insults mean something, but you shouldn't let it get it down. I believe I've read some research that it's like people need to hear 20 compliments for every insult they receive to balance it out. You will never get that. I have never gotten that. And I don't expect anyone else to get that. But when you get something like that reads as an insult, don't hesitate to do a mental translation and say, okay, but like, what does this really mean when someone says that? Not about me, but about anyone in general. If you can trigger that strong reaction in someone to say, I was listening to this, I was reading this, I was whatever, I was consuming this content, and it made me feel this thing very strongly, that's not a bad thing. Don't take that negatively.
And one thing to remember that I had to learn from my co-host Fraser Kane is there are going to be people out there who want content that isn't yours, and that's okay. We used to get this very specific genre of hate mail that was always someone who started off with a hello, I am a senior male in a field parallel to astronomy with a PhD that isn't in astronomy. And they'd like go through and list all of their specifics. And then they'd say, and this is always addressed to Fraser, that I, Pamela, am too glib, to something, and then they just slam me. And the first time we got one of these emails, and they'd always end with asking for me to apologize publicly for not treating astronomy with sufficient respect, I guess, and ask to be the new co-host of the show, always. So the first time we got one of these, I was sitting there going, oh my God, there's this PhD physics professor out there who's a senior tenured person. And I was a first year assistant professor. And I'm like, I need to apologize. I have screwed up. And while I'm sitting and having an existential crisis at my keyboard, a response from Fraser pops up that basically said, thank you for your feedback. We provide this show for free. If you don't like it, we'd appreciate it if you don't take up our bandwidth. Here are other shows you might like. And it was this moment of, oh, that's true. This is their choice. We don't have to conform to them. We have to be there telling our stories in our voice for the people who need us, not for the people who need somebody else. They can go find somebody else. And if you're a woman, you'll get those.
There's a lot of self-confidence that you need to have just to put yourself out there and put your thoughts out there. And I'll say that I struggle with that myself. And there's a lot of layers of different societal ills going on there. But so thank you all for, you are putting a piece of yourself out there every time you go and do a podcast episode or start something new, because it's brave to do something different. So I guess we can, before moving on to another question, I want to give Carrie and Andrés, if you wanted to respond to anything that Ethan or Pamela said, I want to give you that space.
I just wanted to point out what Ethan put in the chat, that there is a layer of sexism in that story, and as you know, it has touched you. And these are the things that also we need to bring to attention or to the front line in our podcast. I was talking about that, should I put a little bit of heavy metal at the beginning of my podcast because it's my podcast, but at the same time, that's something trivial, right? At the same time, I can start talking about things that I don't hear often, like sexism, racism, the trouble that Hispanic people have in the United States and in the world. And these are things that are behind the philosophy of my podcast. And people have told me, like, I like that you talk about the science and this is pretty cool, but you also talk about these problems that astronomy has, because astronomy lives within the society and it's made by humans. And these are things that we're supposed to talk about them, and we're supposed to be feeling uncomfortable. And if we're not feeling uncomfortable, it's because we're not doing a good job, instead of just like being silent. And a lot of people are going to tell you, why don't you stick to the science? It's like, this is something that you cannot separate. So this is something that if you have something to say and you have your own podcast, then you can put the emphasis on what the philosophy of your podcast is going to be, and bring up together this, bring all these things together and put them in front and talk about them as we're doing right now. So I just wanted also to bring that out, that Ethan put in the chat as well regarding this story.
I'd also say that podcasting in general is a great medium to show, not tell. If someone's reading 3 hours of books or articles a day, that's quite a lot. But listening to 3 hours of podcasts isn't a lot for a lot of people, especially if they're having a job like phlebotomists or truck drivers, where they want something in the background while they work. They can listen to 8 hours a day. And so you can really, this is a nice medium for showing and not telling. And at least when it comes to like stereotypes in science, I think it's nice to have, like half my guests are women. And so that means, since I'm interviewing them, half the shows are just 2 women talking about science with no men talking. And I think that's nice. It's nice to just share that and put that out in the world. And it's not something I ever actually explicitly talk about in my podcast, but it's something that if you listen to a lot, you get. I think that's a nice thing. I'll also say, limited sample size. I think that podcasting is a pretty friendly medium compared to, say, Twitter. Twitter is like a pretty vicious place, but in general, I think that podcasting hasn't been quite as taken over as by trolls, although of course there are bad actors, of course. And so the waters are a little warmer if you want to stick a toe in.
Now, Ethan asked me a question, and I wanna ask the panel this very quick question. But are you yourselves podcast listeners? Do you? I know, Carrie, you said at the beginning that you very much are. Pamela, Andres.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. My house would never be cleaned if it wasn't for podcasts and audiobooks. And sometimes you need less than 20 hours of audio, and podcasts are that.
That's fair.
I do too, and audiobooks as well, and especially since I had a kid 2 years ago, that I don't have time to sit down and read. So while I do stuff, I listen to podcasts and audio.
Yeah, it's only me then. I'm the only one who doesn't. I don't like talk radio. I don't like listening to podcasts. Unless I have a very long drive repetitively, I don't listen to audiobooks either. I love music, and I'd rather listen to music 100 times out of 100 than listen to other people talk. I like to read, and that's how I consume most of my stuff. And still, that hasn't stopped me from making a podcast that a lot of people like. So, I'm the exception here, I guess, but I was curious. So
It takes all kinds, I think, right? And there's room for everybody, or there's space for everybody. This is an astrobiology panel. Let's talk about the next top rated question, which is, how do you balance doing science research with podcasting? Now, this is interesting because Ethan, you're a freelance writer, journalist, science communicator, and Pamela, I know that's a big part of your job as well. But then I think Andres and Carrie, you kind of do podcasting as a side gig, and you do all of you do the community a great service with your podcast, but you definitely have different approaches to it. So I'm interested to hear your answers here.
I mean, for me, I would say this is a part. I was a professor last in 2015, and I started podcasting before that, so there was an overlap there. But also, I do have a full-time job where I write, somewhere around 250, 300 articles a year, in addition to all the podcasts I create and the other things I do for my job. But what I would say about that specifically is you have to be the one who's in charge of your time. One of the best pieces of advice I got was like 20 something years ago when I was in grad school. Oh boy, did I say that out loud? Yep, 20 something years ago when I was in grad school. It was, do the best job you can in the time you have to do it. Super simple advice. For me, when it comes to podcasts, I say, look, I'm going to spend this much time preparing for each podcast and no more. And I'm going to block off no more than 2 hours recording each podcast when I do it. And then I've got to assemble it, I've got to edit it, and I've got to upload it. And that's how much time it takes. And based for me on how long are my podcasts, how much time are I going to put into them? And I'm only going to do one a month. That's it. That's all the time I'm going to devote to it. So there is this work time theorem that is sort of a joke physics theorem. It's not real, but it says that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. So I would say be hard on yourself about that, because you have a whole rest of your life to deal with. And if you obsess over every minutia in a podcast, every that says that you want to edit out, every reader or listener comment or criticism, it can eat your whole life. And so it's up to you to say, this is good enough, I'm putting it out there, and we're not going to work on it anymore, and it's on to the next one. And for better or worse, I think for me at least, I have to be willing to do that. Otherwise the balance is impossible. If you don't set boundaries for yourself, where you're saying this is good enough and I'm not going to obsess over it anymore, and now it's on to the next one, it can eat your whole life.
Pamela, you had something in the chat. Do you want to speak to that? Oh, you're muted.
Basically, everything Ethan said, entirely right. Do not let perfection become the enemy of good enough. with podcasts, you have to show up. You have to get the show out the door. And are you really a podcaster if you have 20 unpublished episodes sitting on your hard drive? We all know that person. Don't be that person. Chandrasekhar, I read his biography in grad school, and he had boundary abilities I do not have, but I hold this as like a goal. He would divide up his week and say, this part of the week I'm teaching, this part of the week I'm doing science, this part of the week I'm an editor of the AppJ. And if someone tried to bring the wrong topic to him at a time dedicated to something else, he noped them right out the door, but with fancier language. Find your inner Chandrasekhar.
I
guess
too
I'd
am
say-
still learning. Oh, I'm sorry,
Sorry,
Carrie.
no, that was my bad. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, yes, I too am still learning boundary conditions, I suppose.
I'd say also, create a podcast that is exciting for you and rewarding for you. And then if you are being, fulfilled by this, then it's not a chore. It's a, not always, but like it's mostly a renewing activity for you. So, I pick a cadence that works for me. I really like talking to people. These are like conversations that I'd like to have anyways. I'm just adding a little extra time to edit them. So I look forward to interviews. I have my guests try a weird drink at the beginning. And that's like a silly, funny thing that I look forward to. Like I'm always like picking out weird drinks. I've got like a drawer full of them right here, ready for next shows. And I like can't wait to try them. So I know that's not quite what you were asking, but if you do make it like a renewing thing, then it's not an obligation on your schedule. It's like it's something that restores your love for science, and it nourishes you, and it helps you do all of your other things. I will say I have a cheat code right now, which is I happen to, when I was interviewing for positions, I picked Olin. One reason was because Olin has a very broad definition of research and external impact. And so my research activities are valued, but also my podcasting is like explicitly valued by them. And so I happen to find a position that really likes this work. And that's really positive because that's a good feedback loop. I'm not like trying to do this on the weekends or something. But places like that exist. Look for them.
Yes, I think I can resonate with everything that has been said. So my primary job is building the Rubin Observatory, helping build the Rubin Observatory. We're building the largest digital camera in the world to do a survey of the sky, of the whole sky for 10 years in the optical. And sometimes I don't find the time that I wished I had to do the podcast. But then as Ethan has said, and as Pamela have said, like one thing that Pamela told me is like, yeah, do not let the perfection be the enemy of good. And I need to keep remembering that. And that's part of the reason why the podcast lasted, like we started talking about this in 2018, I think, or 19 maybe. And then it came out in 2021. But it came out in the end. And then even still nowadays, sometimes I don't publish a episode every week, which would be the goal. But at the same time, I think I try to make time. I'm trying to get better at putting boundaries and saying, okay, I have this amount of time, as Ethan said, to the podcast and to the editing, because that takes a lot of time. And I've been trying to get creative and then try to get more people helping me. And I did manage to find people helping me during the first year, but those people are also researchers, and then they get busy and they're not being paid to do this at the same time. So what Carrie said is like find a job that puts value in this type of contributions, which there are. In my job, I have some time to do whatever I want. It's a small portion of that, and then I try to use that time to do part of it is doing education and public adoration, especially in Spanish. So that's important to me. So I spend some of that time to do that as well. And it has been a challenge. It is so because of different reasons. And a lot of the time, I think this is a full-time job, I think, doing science communication. And sometimes I think that that I could be doing better, of course, because I'm not dedicating enough time because I'm doing the research. At the same time, I'm doing my best. I'm, as Carrie said, I'm also looking forward to the podcast, to what the people are going to interview. They're going to tell me. So sometimes I try to do episodes in my area of expertise, but at the same time, I don't try to be still because that's gonna be easier. But then I don't try to be just in my zone of comfort, because the only thing basically you could say that you need is curiosity. Even if I'm not an expert in astrobiology, for example, which I'm not, or exoplanets, I still have questions that I'm pretty sure my audience will be want to hear. And I always try to imagine in the back of my mind that I'm telling these stories to my mom, which is an intelligent person but doesn't speak English and doesn't do astronomy. And I'm pretty sure that she would have the same type of questions that I'm asking. So that also helps looking forward towards doing the episode and dedicating the time. And that helps overcome those challenges. But I do have to set up priorities at the same time, of course.
I'm going to ask another question. It's actually going to be an amalgamation of 3 different questions that I see, but they're all under the theme of how do you do it? How do you decide what topic to talk about? How do you decide the guest? What makes a good guest? And then how one question specifically mentions a script. So say you only spend 2 hours on a podcast, maybe, I don't know if that's per week or per month or whatever, but how do you have a script there? So lots of questions, but basically it's the word how and then a question mark. So Carrie, I actually wonder if you might kick off this question.
Sure. So I think one thing I like about all of my favorite podcasts is they have a format. So I started with the format really quickly. I have an intro thing I say every time. In terms of who I'm talking to, I generally, again, this is something that I have to like as well. And so I lurk at conferences, I look at my journals and I scan them and I say, what's a really interesting article? Who gave a really, really good talk? I also, like Ethan, like to bring in people, usually at the postdoc level. Grad students tend to have a little bit of a hard time, but I think postdocs are great. I think my show is a easy first step before they get onto NPR. So I'll pick somebody who has something interesting to say, usually about a specific topic or a specific paper presentation. And then I do have an outline of questions that I always make in advance. I read some interviewing books and as part of the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship, you could always look into those. And there's some questions that I'll generally draw from frequently. If I'll ask them to explain, I'll set up the problem. I'll ask them to explain their methods. I'll ask them what they like about it. Sometimes I'll ask what are they most proud of, or misconception they want to address. Those are kind of common questions that I'll use to fill in. And then at the end, we try a drink. I'm sorry, I'm not saying this in an organized way, but at the end, I also have them share a fun fact about themselves. And a fun fact is a bit of a misnomer, but that's intended to take this person who to the general public seems like a super genius who's done all this amazing stuff and humanize them a little bit. And then it's like a reminder that they have a dog. They're from Slovakia. They really like jazz music. They really like collecting Roman coins. And it's like some sort of humanizing bit that I think is nice, but we definitely, like, every show kind of is very structured and follows that. And so because it's structured, I kind of always know where I'm going. And if you do it a couple hundred times, you get into it. Then the how for editing, again, I use Descript. I just started using Descript last year. I'm a total convert. It saves me a ton of time. I think it's much more easier for people to get onboarded to Descript than something like GarageBand or one of the other Audacity platforms. And so I'll edit it. I usually do edit out all the ums still, unless I can't get it quite out. Have never been able to drop that one quite. So there's a fair amount of time editing. That's the biggest thing. And then you do some packaging, and I use Libsyn for my distribution. And big thanks to Brandy Posey, who's a podcaster, who showed me how to do that.
So many good pieces of advice in there about the technical aspects of podcasting. Thank you. I think, Pamela, were you about to speak and did I cut you off?
I was going to say Libsyn is really something I firmly suggest. As a company, they are always out there figuring out how to make it easy for shows to take advantage of Spotify, Apple, Google, all these different platforms without having to leave their interface. Yeah. And if you can avoid doing a script and just, as she's pointing out, interview people, it will make everything easier. One of the ways we've been able to get to 700 episodes with Astronomy Cast is each week Fraser and I take on a topic where he is essentially putting me through an oral exam, and I'm hoping to God I read all the right papers in preparation for the interview, which is both terrifying but also interesting to the audience. And I'm careful to pick topics that are things I want to catch up on. By saying, okay, we're going to do a show on the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. That forces me to read the treaty, read the history, get to understand it. And I get to do something that senior scientists don't usually get to do. I get to constantly learn. And that's how I pick topics. What do I want to learn?
I guess I can go next. My experience: outlines, great. Scripts, bad. I never have a script. I always have an outline. And I share that outline with my guest before the show. And then the day of the show, before we start recording, I run them through the outline and I say, here are the points I want to hit with you. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I had sometimes I will have a guest say, yes, like, I want to talk about this issue of sexism in astronomy. Good, we'll do it. I want to talk about this issue of indigenous justice in astronomy. Good. I once had a trans person on the show, and I asked them if there was anything they wanted to after we went through the astronomy topics, and they did not bring up being trans at all. And we got through the whole thing. And at the end, the last question I always ask everyone is, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners out there? We got through the whole thing, not a single mention of them being trans. And I talked to them afterwards about how, like, I thought that they might bring this up, but because they didn't bring it up, I didn't bring it up. And they said to me, oh my goodness, like, I didn't even realize. And to me, that's a victory. It's a victory if someone can get through a whole thing and just be a professional. So if you have something you want to bring up, if your guest has something they want to bring up, invite them to do it, but never compel them to do it. And as far as my rule goes, I don't say you have to be a postdoc, but I do say for grad students, you have to be at least a PhD candidate or equivalent, because you, my guest, has to be a better expert in your field than I am. And if I, even though my PhD isn't in your field, if I have the knowledge of a third or fourth year grad student in your field, and you have a knowledge of a first or second year grad student in the field, my goal is always to make my guest look good. It's fine if I look like an idiot. I don't care. I say something wrong, I want the guest to correct me, but I don't want to say something wrong and have the guest not know if I'm right or not. And I don't want to ask the guest a question and have the guest say, I don't know, and we can't go anywhere from there. So my rule is, the person I'm having on has to have something of value to say well beyond what I'm capable of saying on my own. And that's how you get a good conversation.
So in my case, the very first time I wanted to write a podcast, I was very terrified about how good of a job I would do. So I sat down and really wrote down a script. And it took me a long time. And in the end, if you listen to the first episode, it's like me reading a lecture. And it's fine. It was fine. In the end, I started to realize that wasn't the style of the podcast that I wanted to have. Like, to read it, I wanted to have something more flexible. So I'm settling down now with an outline. Now I think I like to make an outline. I like to share the outline with my guests beforehand to see, like, more or less, this is going to guide us. We don't have to go through all of this. But if you want to add something, then of course we're going to talk about that. And then I also encourage them to tell me their stories. So I tell them, we're going to talk about the science that you do. I want you to please think that you're talking to somebody who doesn't know anything of astronomy. But I also want you to tell me your story. Like, you're an immigrant in the United States, and then you had to overcome these barriers. And if you feel comfortable with, right? So of course, if not, we're not going to talk about that. And then it becomes a more relaxed conversation. And then we make jokes, and then we talk about things that are culturally relevant to Hispanics and Latin Americans. And it becomes a nice conversation. And then we all have fun and we make jokes, and it's fine. So that type of episodes, that's what makes them a good guest, and me trying to encourage that in them as well. So yeah, so I'm still finding my voice. We only have like 25 episodes so far, but that's how it's gone so far.
Sadly, we are approaching the end of our hour together, and this is always the worst part of these panels because it means that, I have to stop asking questions soon. So before we part ways, is there anything, I'm going to take a leaf from Ethan's book and ask, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us or just want to share about your perspective that we haven't been able to address yet?
One last thought I can say just very briefly is you are going to encounter critics, you are going to encounter enemies. And just like in any video game you play, when you keep encountering new enemies, that's a sign you're moving in the right direction. So don't let that dissuade you.
One weird thing may happen if you get really good at communicating science. There's going to be folks out there that forget that you're actually still a scientist. I'm still a senior scientist doing research. You're going to have to remind them, and that's okay. That just means that you're having a problem Carl Sagan had.
And how can I go after that? I was going to say, podcasts can reach a lot of people. My listeners are all across the world, only English speakers, unfortunately for me. But there are, young students. There are people who love science but are afraid to start it and then decide to go back to school. And there's truck drivers, and there's people doing all types of jobs. And it's a really fun thing. If you have a university lecture and you have like 50 people, you're feeling like, great, like I talked to 50 people today. But podcasting, you can reach way more than 50 people. And you can reach people who don't live near a university and maybe don't know a scientist. And I think it's really cool. So I think there's plenty of space. Jump in, the water's fine.
Absolutely. I think there's plenty of space. I'm pretty sure you're going to have something interesting to say. It's going to be your podcast, so you can decide what you're going to talk about and the emphasis you're going to place on it. There are technical things to figure out, but there's the internet, and you can talk to people like us or people who know more, like Pamela and Ethan than me, and Carrie. You can find these people and find the help, but don't let that stop you, because those things are learnable, and I'm pretty sure there are people who actually will need or we want to hear the interesting things that you have to say.
That was very well said, all of you. I have learned a lot, and I feel very inspired now to maybe get back into that podcast idea that I started a while ago with an old roommate of mine. So and she's actually here right now too. So yeah, Lucia, let's get back into it. Anyway, looks like we are just about out of time. I wanted to thank you all again for spending an hour with us to talk about science podcasting and to answer our questions. There were quite a few that we didn't get to, so if you wanted to take a look at those, and then if you had one that you felt strongly about answering, please email me and I can put that on the PAWS webpage when I get this recording put up. And if any of you are going to be at LPSC in March or at the whatever number AAS in June in Albuquerque, I will be there. So please feel free to send me an email. And if you want to meet up, I'm very happy to do that. And just in general, anybody, if you want to talk, just let me know. So with that, just want to thank you again for all your time and your advice and everything. So glad to have you on. Everyone, have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you next time at the next PAWS event. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.